My mother-in-law thought she found a brilliant legal loophole to drain my son's college fund to pay off her gambling debts. She didn't read the fine print, and the IRS doesn't care about family ties. Freeze frame. Look at the woman sitting across from me in this mahogany-paneled conference room. That's Barbara, my mother-in-law. She's wearing a vintage Chanel tweed suit and a string of Akoya pearls that probably cost more than my first 2 years of law school. 10 minutes ago, she walked in here with her chin tilted high, smelling of expensive lily-of-the-valley perfume and unearned confidence. She thought she was here to settle a little family misunderstanding. Now look at her hands. Those manicured fingers, painted in a shade of royal red, are trembling so hard she can't even pick up her glass of water. The ice cubes are clinking against the crystal like a frantic distress signal. The color has completely drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a gray, dusty mask. Standing by the door are two men in dark, unremarkable suits. They aren't family. They aren't lawyers. They are special agents from the Internal Revenue Service. And they aren't here for a misunderstanding. They are here because Barbara just triggered a financial trap so lethal it has a nickname in the world of high-stakes forensic accounting. I designed that trap. I set the bait, and I watched for 3 months as Barbara greedily swallowed every last bit of it. Before I tell you how a boring tax attorney like me legally dismantled a socialite's entire existence, do me a favor. If you've ever been treated like the help by people who were supposed to be your family, hit that like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm that justice actually matters. And while you're at it, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one, and I want to know who is standing with me today. Now, to understand why I was willing to send my own husband's mother to federal prison, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to when I was the invisible outsider in the House of Sterling. The Sterlings don't just have money, they have lineage. At least that's what Barbara tells anyone who will listen for more than 5 seconds. They live in a sprawling 6-bedroom Georgian colonial in Greenwich, Connecticut. It's the kind of house where the grass is trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches by a crew of 4 men, and the air inside permanently smells of expensive eucalyptus candles and old, dusty resentment. I married David, Barbara's only son, 6 years ago. David is a golden child in the most literal sense. He's charming, handsome, and has never had to make a difficult decision in his life because Barbara was always there to make it for him. He works in private equity, which is Sterling speak for he manages a portfolio his grandfather built while playing golf 3 times a week. I, on the other hand, was a mistake in Barbara's grand design. My father was a high school math teacher. My mother was a nurse. I worked 3 jobs to get through college, and spent my 20s in windowless libraries earning my CPA and my JD. I don't care about yacht club rankings or which florist is currently en vogue. I care about numbers. I care about the law. I care about things that are objective and irrefutable. To Barbara, I was a calculator with a pulse. I remember my first Thanksgiving with the family. We were sitting in the formal dining room, the one with the silk wallpaper and the portraits of ancestors who probably made their money in ways the history books choose to forget. Barbara was at the head of the table, presiding over the silver platters of organic turkey and artisanal stuffing. "So, Claire dear," Barbara said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness she uses when she's about to deliver a blow. She sipped her 1996 vintage Bordeaux, her pinky finger extended perfectly. "David tells me you're moving into forensic accounting? Is that right?" I nodded. "Yes. I'm joining a firm that specializes in international tax evasion and trust litigation." Barbara let out a soft, tinkling laugh that sounded like shards of glass falling on a marble floor. She glanced at her friends, the Montgomerys, who were seated to her left. "How quaint," she purred. "It must be so exhausting to spend your days chasing after other people's pennies. It's a bit like being a high-end janitor, don't you think? Cleaning up the messy numbers of people who actually build legacies?" David laughed. He didn't mean to be cruel. He just didn't know any better. He had been trained since birth to find Barbara's wit charming. "She's brilliant at it, Mom," David said, reaching over to pat my hand. "She found a 3-cent error in our prenuptial agreement that saved us 6 figures in potential filing fees." Barbara's eyes flashed, a quick, predatory spark of green. "Oh, David, don't be so dramatic. Prenups are just formalities for people like us. We don't really need them because we have loyalty. Blood is thicker than water, isn't it?" She turned back to me, her smile never reaching her eyes. "I just hope you don't bring that office energy into our home, Claire. We prefer to keep things light here. No need to look for ghosts in the machines when everything is already perfect." For 5 years, I was the invisible woman at those dinners. I was the person who organized the caterers, the person who made sure the kids' schedules were handled, and the person who quietly reviewed the family's tax returns every April, only to be told I was overanalyzing when I pointed out that Barbara's charitable donations didn't have the proper receipts to back them up. "It's a family foundation, Claire," Barbara would snap, her voice losing the honey and turning to vinegar the moment we were alone. "I don't need a girl from a public university telling me how to spend my own father's money. You should be grateful you even have a seat at this table. If it weren't for David, you'd still be filing 1040 EZs for people who shop at discount warehouses." The gaslighting was constant. If I was quiet, I was sullen. If I spoke up, I was confrontational. If I pointed out a financial inconsistency, I was paranoid. I learned to live in the shadows of the Sterling mansion. I became a master of the silent observation. I watched Barbara spend money like it was an infinite resource. New Lexuses every 2 years, Hermes scarves like they were Kleenex, and 3-week trips to casinos in Monaco that she claimed were cultural retreats. But even then, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to be left alone to raise my son, Leo. Leo was the only thing in that house that felt real. He had my father's quiet curiosity and David's easy smile. He was 4 years old, and he was the light of my life. My father, before he passed away 2 years ago, had one final wish. He wanted to make sure Leo was never beholden to the Sterling legacy. He had spent his life saving. Every bonus, every summer school paycheck, every penny of his modest inheritance. He put it all into a trust fund for Leo. $1.2 million. "Protect it, Claire," my father had whispered on his deathbed. His voice was weak, but his grip on my hand was iron. The Sterlings, they see people as assets. They'll see this trust as an opportunity. Don't let them touch it. It's for Leo's freedom. Promise me. "I promise, Dad," I said. And as a tax attorney who spent her days dismantling the schemes of the world's most sophisticated white-collar criminals, I knew exactly what kind of firewall I needed to build. I didn't just write a trust. I built a labyrinth. I knew Barbara. I knew her arrogance. I knew her secret habit of borrowing from the family accounts to cover her losing streaks at the underground baccarat tables in the city. I knew she thought I was a coward who would never dare to challenge the matriarch. So, I inserted Article 9, Section 4C into the trust documents. In my industry, we call it a poison pill. It was a clause that stated any withdrawal over $10,000 made by a non-parental guardian that was not verified by a third-party educational institution would trigger an immediate, automated audit report to the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. It was a digital tripwire, and I knew, with the cold certainty of a forensic accountant, that Barbara wouldn't be able to resist the urge to step on it. Have you ever had an in-law or a family member who acted like your hard-earned money, or your children's future, was just a family pot they could dip into whenever they felt like it? Did they treat you like you were the crazy one for wanting to set boundaries? Tell me your story in the comments. I want to know when you realize that blood isn't an excuse for theft. Now stay with me, because we're about to get to the part where Barbara's luck finally runs out. The air in the grotto, a windowless basement hidden beneath a 5-star Italian restaurant in Lower Manhattan, was thick with the scent of stale espresso and the metallic tang of unwashed anxiety. This wasn't the Monte Carlo. There were no tuxedos here, just high-stakes baccarat, heavy-set men with cold eyes, and Barbara Sterling. Barbara adjusted her Hermes scarf, trying to hide the dampness on her neck. She was down $150,000. Again. Her personal line of credit at the club was maxed out, and the investments she'd told David about were actually gambling debts being rolled over like a snowball in an avalanche. To the world, Barbara was a pillar of the community. To the men in the grotto, she was a whale, a predictable source of easy revenue. "One more hand, Vinny," Barbara whispered, her voice cracking. "My luck is turning. I can feel it." Vinny, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of a block of granite, didn't smile. "Your luck is fine, Mrs. Sterling. It's your bank account I'm worried about. You've got 48 hours to settle the markers. After that, we stop being polite and start calling your son at the firm." Barbara felt a sickening jolt in her stomach. If David found out, the illusion would shatter. She'd be stripped of her social standing, her seat on the board of the Botanical Gardens, and most importantly, her access to the Sterling family office. While Barbara was sweating in a Manhattan basement, I was sitting in my father's quiet, sun-drenched study in Oregon, finalizing the paperwork for Leo's trust. My father, Arthur, had been a math teacher for 40 years. He believed in two things: the power of compound interest and the absolute necessity of a backup plan. "Claire," he told me, his voice barely a rattle as the cancer took its final toll. "Wealthy people like the Sterlings, they don't see money as a tool for security, they see it as a scorecard. And when their score gets low, they start looking for someone else's pile to raid. Don't let Leo be their piggy bank." I took those words to heart. When I drafted the trust, I didn't just use a standard template. I treated it like a piece of high-level defensive software. The trust was a $1.2 million legacy. On the surface, it looked like a standard Section 529-style educational vehicle, but I'd structured it as a complex, qualified beneficiary trust with a very specific, invisible trigger. Under Article 9, Section 4C, I inserted a clause regarding unauthorized fiduciary distributions. Because I was the primary trustee, but Barbara was named as the secondary family conservator in the event of my absence, I knew she would have a window of access. Most people would just put a lock on the door. I decided to leave the door unlocked, but rigged with a silent alarm that notified the federal government. I coded the account so that any withdrawal exceeding $10,000 that did not have an accompanying letter of tuition enrollment from a verified university would trigger an automatic electronic filing to the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. But that wasn't the poison pill. The real kicker was the tax liability. The clause stated that any non-qualified withdrawal would be legally reclassified as immediate taxable income to the person making the withdrawal, not the trust. And because of the way I'd worded the penalty structure, it carried a 50% abusive trust surcharge. If Barbara took a dime, she wasn't just stealing from her grandson. She was legally assuming a federal tax debt that would be twice the size of whatever she stole. I didn't tell David. David was a good man, but he was an enabler. He'd spent 34 years being told that Barbara was a saint, and he lacked the emotional armor to see the monster beneath the Chanel. I knew that if I told him, he'd accidentally mention it to her, and the trap would be ruined. I was playing a long game. I was protecting Leo. And deep down, I was waiting to see if Barbara was actually as greedy as my spreadsheet suggested. The opportunity arrived in January. My firm, Mitchell & Ross, had been hired to lead the forensic audit of a massive offshore shell company scandal based in London. It was the case of a lifetime, a partner track move, but it required me to be on site for 3 months, no exceptions. "It's too long, David," I said, pacing our bedroom. "Leo is 4. He needs a routine. He needs—" "Not Barbara." David looked up from his iPad, his expression a mix of confusion and mild irritation. Claire, we've been over this. It's an incredible career move for you. And it's only 3 months. My mother has been begging for more time with Leo. She's his grandmother, for heaven's sake. You act like she's a villain in a Disney movie. I don't think she's a villain, David. I think she's financially impulsive. Impulsive? David laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. She's a sterling. She's been managing budgets since before you were born. You're being paranoid again. It's that office energy she talks about. You see every family member as a potential audit target. The gaslighting had shifted from subtle to overt. David wasn't just defending his mother, he was attacking my sanity. The next night, Barbara came over for dinner. She was wearing a soft, lavender cashmere sweater and had brought Leo a hand-carved wooden train set. She was the picture of the doting, saintly grandmother. "Claire, dear," Barbara said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her touch felt like a cold snakeskin. "David tells me you're worried about leaving Leo with me. It hurts, truly. I know I'm not as efficient as you are with your spreadsheets, but I do know how to love my own grandson." "It's not about love, Barbara," I said, my voice tight. "It's about the responsibility. There are medical forms, school schedules, the trust management." "The trust," Barbara interrupted, her eyes sharpening for a split second before softening back into a grandmotherly gaze. "I saw the statement on the counter earlier, $1.2 million. Such a lovely gift your father left. It's a shame to think of it just sitting there in a stagnant account when it could be utilized for the family's greater security." I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Utilization. That was her word for theft. "The money is for Leo's education, Barbara," I said firmly. "It stays where it is." "Of course, dear. I was only thinking of the family legacy," she purred. Then she turned to David, her bottom lip trembling slightly. "Perhaps Claire is right, David. Maybe I'm too old. Maybe I'm not qualified enough to watch my own blood. I'll just go back to my empty house and let you find a nanny. A stranger who will probably steal the silver, but at least she'll have a resume Claire likes." "Mom, stop," David snapped. He turned to me, his face flushed with shame. "Claire, look what you're doing. You're making her feel like a criminal. This is ridiculous. My mother stays with Leo or you don't go to London. Period." That was it. The ultimatum. I looked at Barbara. She was dabbing a non-existent tear from her eye, but her gaze was locked on mine. In that moment, I saw the truth. She knew I wanted the London job. She knew David would side with her. And she knew that for the next 90 days, she would have the key to Leo's future. I didn't fight anymore. I realized that if I wanted to save Leo from the Sterlings forever, I had to let them think they'd won. "Fine," I said, my voice dead calm. "Barbara will watch Leo, but she has to sign the temporary guardianship and conservatorship papers. For legal reasons. My firm requires it for the insurance." "Anything you need, dear," Barbara smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching the trapdoor close on the prey. She signed the papers without reading the fine print. She didn't see the clause that linked her Social Security number to the trust's IRS reporting software. She didn't see the poison pill. I left for London 3 days later. As I boarded the plane, I didn't feel like I was leaving my son in danger. I felt like I was a soldier leaving a landmine in the path of an invading army. I sat in my seat, opened my laptop, and pulled up the real-time monitoring software for Leo's trust account. The balance was $1,240,500. "Come on, Barbara," I whispered to the empty air. "Step on the wire." The morning after the dinner, the Sterling mansion didn't wake up to the smell of eucalyptus candles. It woke up to the smell of cold, hard reality. Barbara had spent the night calling her high-priced fixer attorneys. But by 9 a.m., the news was catastrophic. Every one of her personal bank accounts, including the Sterling Family Foundation account she'd been skimming from for years, had a federal administrative freeze on them. When you steal from a family member, you might get a slap on the wrist. But when you trigger a Section 6659A abusive trust report to the IRS, you aren't fighting a relative anymore. You're fighting a machine that doesn't have feelings, doesn't care about your Chanel suits, and certainly doesn't accept it was just a loan as a legal defense. Barbara barged into my home office at 10 a.m., David trailing behind her like a lost puppy. She wasn't purring today. She looked like a cornered animal. "Claire, you are going to call them right now!" she screamed, throwing a stack of printed emails onto my desk. "I just spoke to my attorney, Thorne. He says the IRS has flagged $400,000 as unreported income, plus a $200,000 penalty. That's $600,000. I don't have that kind of liquidity. You told them I stole it." I didn't look up from my laptop. "I didn't tell them anything, Barbara. I simply set up an automated reporting system. You were the one who made the withdrawals. You were the one who coded them as qualified expenses when they were actually gambling markers. That's called tax fraud. And the system reported it automatically." "Claire, honey, please," David said, his voice cracking. "We can't have Mom going through an audit. It'll ruin the Sterling name. Just tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you made a clerical error in the trust documents." I finally looked up, and for the first time, I looked at David with pure, unadulterated pity. "I am a forensic accountant, David. If I claim a clerical error on a $400,000 theft, I lose my license. I lose my career. You're asking me to commit perjury to save the woman who just robbed our son's future." "It's not robbery if it stays in the family," Barbara shrieked. "The IRS isn't in your family, Barbara," I said. Which brings us back to that mahogany-paneled conference room from the beginning of our story. 3 days later, the settlement meeting took place. Barbara arrived with her attorney, Mr. Thorne, thinking she could negotiate her way out of the poison pill. She thought her social status was a currency that still had value, but as I mentioned before, I didn't just set a trap. I invited the audience. Sitting at the table weren't just my lawyers, but the 2 IRS special agents. I had spent the last 48 hours providing them with a digital trail of every marker Barbara had settled at the grotto. I showed them the Hermes receipts. I showed them the Equinox Gala invoices. I sat there, calm and silent, as Mr. Thorne tried to argue that Barbara was financially unsophisticated and hadn't understood the trust's terms. Special Agent Miller didn't even crack a smile. "Mr. Thorne, your client signed a temporary conservatorship agreement that explicitly outlined the tax implications of non-qualified distributions. She then knowingly miscoded 12 separate transactions as educational tuition. That's not lack of sophistication. That's intent to evade." Barbara looked at me, her eyes wet with tears that were finally real. The tears of a narcissist who realized her golden child son couldn't save her this time. "Claire," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we're blood. How can you do this to me?" I leaned forward, mirroring the exact posture she'd used to belittle me for 6 years. "You told me once that people like me were just janitors, cleaning up after people like you," I said, my voice ice cold. "Well, consider this the final cleanup. I'm not doing this to you, Barbara. You did this to yourself the moment you decided my son's future was your personal slush fund. I'm just the one making sure the math is correct." Watching the person who spent years making you feel small finally realize they have no power over you is a strange feeling. It's not joy, it's peace. If you were in my shoes, listening to her beg for family loyalty after she stole $400,000 from her own grandson, would you have shown her mercy? Or would you have let the IRS finish what they started? Let me know in the comments. The fallout was absolute. The IRS didn't stop at the $400,000. Once they opened Barbara Sterling's tax history, they found 10 years of creative accounting in the Sterling Family Foundation. They found offshore accounts she'd inherited and never declared. They found a pattern of systemic tax evasion that made the trust fund theft look like pocket change. To pay the back taxes, penalties, and interest, which ballooned to over $2.1 million, Barbara was forced to liquidate her personal assets. The Georgian Colonial in Greenwich was sold. The Lexuses were repossessed. The Hermes scarves were probably sold at a luxury consignment shop for 50 cents on the dollar. Barbara moved into a small, two-bedroom condo in a town she used to mock. She is currently on a 5-year probation for federal tax misdemeanor charges. David tried to stay with her, but the sterling legacy he'd spent his life defending turned out to be a house of cards. David and I are in mediation. He still doesn't quite understand why I couldn't just fix it for his mother, and that's why we can't be together. You can't build a life with someone who thinks theft is just how families work. As for Leo, his trust fund was restored. As part of the IRS recovery process and a separate civil suit I filed, the $400,000 was clawed back from Barbara's estate before the government took their share. It's back in the account, growing, protected by a new set of firewalls that even I can't bypass without a court order. Last week, I took Leo to the park. It was a simple afternoon, no caterers, no silk wallpaper, no old resentment. Just a mother and her son. I realized then that for 6 years, I had been searching for Barbara's approval. I had been shrinking myself, trying to prove I was worthy of the sterling name. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I was quiet enough, they'd eventually see me as family. But my father's math lessons came back to me. You can't add value to a zero. Barbara was a financial and emotional zero. No matter how much of myself I poured into that family, the result was always going to be nothing. I didn't need their lineage. I had my own. I had my father's integrity, my mother's resilience, and my own absolute competence. If you're watching this and you're dealing with a toxic in-law, a narcissistic parent, or a family that treats you like an outsider, I want you to remember this. Your worth is not a family pot. It is yours and yours alone. Don't be afraid to set the digital tripwires. Don't be afraid to demand that the math of your life adds up. Because blood is a biological fact, but family is a fiduciary duty. And if they breach that duty, you have every right to revoke their license to be in your life. Take back your power, set your boundaries, and never ever let someone steal your future while they're smiling at you over dinner. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, if it gave you the courage to look at your own fine print, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. It helps more than you know. Until next time, stay sharp, stay legal, and stay empowered.